If an organisation is left with no choice, if an organisation which is predicated on terror is left with no choice, then it becomes a freedom fighter, then it becomes an active terrorist unit. If you deny Hamas negotiations, the inevitable cause and effect is that Hamas starts to behave like Hamas, like a scorpion on the back of a toad. It will do what it does naturally. They will turn into what they are accused of being. They will have a temper tantrum which will have lasting effect, like a spoilt child smashing the furniture. And the tantrum causes chaos or terror. So muting, silencing Hamas is not the way forward. Not attending the Arab conference, which Israel didn't attend, is not the way forward. Talking, even modest conversations, is a possible way to resolution, and not talking is actually foolish. So, should Hamas and Iran go to see Mr. Putin? Maybe it's a birthday present. We've got to remember that the Hamas attack on the 7th of October was on Putin's birthday. I don't know how Mr. Putin sees that, whether or not he sees it as a cake with a present and candles on it, but maybe not. Now, if Hamas is a state, and presumably it's being welcomed in Moscow as a state, then it is restricted in its activity by the rule of law, and it must act appropriately. Therefore, the action on the 7th of October is something that it cannot accept as stately. It's not civilised. It's terrorist. It could, of course, say, well, that wasn't us. That was done by the Qasim Brigade, which is our military arm, and we're not in control of our military arm, rather like Dr. Strangelove. If a state is a terrorist organisation, then that state is no longer a state. A real state is constrained by the conventions of being a real state. So if Hamas is acting like a real state and it doesn't put its citizens in harm's way, then it can expect Israel to do the same sort of thing. But Israel doesn't have any choice. Israel doesn't have a terrorist arm. Israel is a state. Israel has to act like a state. It cannot indulge in collective punishment. It must abide by the norms of civilized state behaviour. Therefore, it should have attended the conference, the Arab conference, and it didn't. It should have been exploring all avenues for peace, and it failed to do so. The whole principle of a just war, which I've looked at in previous videos, is about war. Active war is the last thing you do after you've exhausted all other avenues to get peace. It's the final act, not the first act, not the impulsive knee-jerk response. So the self-defense plea, which is what Israel is invoking and what countries like Britain are saying they support, Israel has a right to self-defense. That self-defense plea is watered down to almost nothing if Israel is seen not to have attempted to engage in conversations with the fellow state, Hamas, if Hamas is a state. And Hamas aspires to be and claims to be a state, and indeed controls the Gaza Strip. Now, there's many qualifications you can put on this. You can say, well, Hamas may be the legitimate authority in the early part of the 21st century, but it's not had an election since it got into power, so it's hardly a democratic organisation. But we're not talking about democracy, we're talking about statehood, and there are many different forms of state. We're talking about, is Hamas a state or is Hamas a terrorist organisation? And I think Israel recognises Hamas as the legitimate authority in Gaza. Even if Hamas does not recognise Israel as a legitimate authority, even if Iran doesn't recognise Israel as a legitimate authority, there is an understanding that Israel is a state and not some sort of terrorist organization, not some sort of freedom fighters. Israel has gone beyond the point where it can be defined by the Irgun. So, but you have to ask, has Israel exhausted all avenues to resolve this conflict before it lays siege, before it enters the Gaza Strip? And the answer, unfortunately, I think, is no. And that gives credibility to the claims that Hamas is... that gives credibility and dignity to Hamas, beyond the sympathy that we should naturally feel for Palestine. And of course, remember, Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian leader, attended the Arab conference. Was he representing Hamas at that point? Was he representing the Gaza Strip authorities at that point? Well, maybe not, but he was representing the Palestinian people. And there's many of those in the Gaza Strip. The absence of Israel at the Arab conference is a decisive point in the analysis of this conflict